You have just heard the chest beating and grunts of a mountain gorilla, and this is part one of Gorillas in Our Midst, a 3-part miniseries from Our Wild World. Welcome to Our Wild World. I'm your host, Dr. John David Alfords. I've been an educator for over 38 years, serving as an adjunct professor, superintendent, principal, and teacher. Whenever we can, my wife Christina, also an educator, and I are trekking into the wild to see our 2-legged, 4-legged, and winged friends in the animal kingdom. Together we've been entertained by a mountain gorilla in the impenetrable forest as she played on the stomach of her napping silverback dad. We've been startled by the thunderous roaring of 2 aggressive hippos in the Okavango Delta as they fought behind our tents, shaking the ground as they did so. We've had a curious African lion lie down outside our tent as she played with our tent bag. While hiking in the bush at Lake Tanganyika, I've come within 75 yards of an elephant family drinking from a stream. At Meru National Park in Kenya, Christina and I came eye to eye with a black mamba who lifted herself up just 12 feet from us, warning us that she was about to strike. After all my time in the bush, I have a story or two to tell. So it makes sense that I'm combining my passion for teaching with my passion for wildlife to launch Our Wild World, introducing listeners to, as the Lakota would say, Itakuye Oyasin, or all our relations in the animal world. Each episode is meticulously researched and includes my first-hand observations from the bush. I think you'll find it's a podcast like no other. As you listen, be sure to check out our sister social media pages on Facebook, Instagram, X, and Blue Sky for photos and videos that Christina and I have taken of the wildlife featured in each podcast episode. And now, let's begin. In this special mini-series from Our Wild World, we will be exploring the behavior of both lowland and mountain gorillas. I've been fortunate to track gorillas 3 times in my life. The lowland gorillas at Kahuzi-Biega National Park in the Congo, what was then Zaire, the mountain gorillas that Dian Fossey studied at Parque de los Volcanos in Rwanda, and in Uganda's impenetrable forest. In this episode, part 1, I will be focusing on the eastern lowland gorillas of Kahuzi-Biega, which I visited in 1991. I'll also share with listeners how I almost became one of the first victims of the Rwandan genocide when I was detained by soldiers and accused of being a Ugandan gorilla of the wrong kind for taking a picture of the presidential palace. My meeting with famed conservationist Conrad Aveling will also be included in this episode. Part 2 will feature Dian Fossey's groundbreaking research of mountain gorillas, her battles to save them, and her untimely, still unsolved death. I'll share with listeners my conversation with Fossey's lover, National Geographic photographer Bob Campbell, and my correspondence with her biographer, famed Canadian conservationist Farley Mowat, as well as American diplomats stationed in Kigali, Rwanda in the 1990s, as we explore who may have been responsible for her murder. Part 2 will also include Coco the gorilla and the groundbreaking research that Francine Patterson did teaching her American Sign Language. Part 3 will take listeners to Parque de los Volcanos, where Dian Fossey did her research at Karisok. And we'll also visit Uganda's impenetrable forest as we learn more about the behavior and social structure of mountain gorillas. And now let's begin. Gorillas have long been misunderstood. For many of us of a certain age, the first gorilla we ever became aware of was King Kong, scaling the Empire State Building and battling airplanes and helicopters like they were no more than bothersome flies. The film reflects the prevailing misconception of gorillas that dated back to their discovery in the mid-19th century as being fierce, even monstrous creatures. Almost as soon as they were discovered, European and American trophy hunters began hunting them. By the time Dian Fossey began her study of mountain gorillas in 1966, the species was well on its way to extinction due to poaching and habitat loss. Thanks to Fossey's Herculean efforts, joined by other brave conservationists like Conrad Aveling in this podcast, the mountain gorilla population has rebounded and is one of the true success stories of conservation. Gorillas are the largest of the great apes, which include orangutans, gorillas, bonobos, chimpanzees, and humans. All the great apes are closely related to people. All the more reason why we should do more to protect them. Chimpanzees and bonobos are the closest related to humans. Humans and chimpanzees share about 98.8% of their DNA, enough so that you could have a blood transfusion with a chimp and be just fine, as long as you shared the same blood type. Gorillas are not far behind, with 98% of the same genetic code as humans. There are two species of gorillas, eastern and western gorillas. Within these two species are four subspecies: the western lowland gorilla, the cross river gorilla, the eastern lowland gorilla, also called the Grauer's gorilla, and the mountain gorilla. This podcast focuses on the latter two, the eastern lowland and mountain gorillas. Eastern lowland gorillas are only found in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Eastern lowland gorillas are the largest of the four gorilla subspecies. Although they closely resemble mountain gorillas, there are subtle differences with eastern lowland gorillas, having shorter hair, narrower faces, and rounder nostrils. Lowland gorillas spend most of their day feeding and building their nests to sleep in. Males can weigh up to 500 pounds, so that's a lot of food. Primarily herbivores, lowland gorillas feed on fruit and bamboo shoots, but have also been observed to eat ants and other insects. It is believed that gorillas eat as many as 100 different types of fruit. Both lowland and mountain gorillas build a new nest each night to sleep in, usually starting in late afternoon. Adults of both subspecies are more likely to build their nests on the ground, since they are more stable to support their heavier weight. Juveniles are more prone to building their nests in the trees, since they offer additional protection from predators. However, the choice to build a nest in a tree or on the ground depends somewhat on the habitat, as well as social and environmental factors. Some families seem to prefer treetop nests. In habitats with less tree density, gorillas are more likely to build their nests on the ground. When it is raining or particularly cold, gorillas may choose to build their nest on the ground because it offers more protection from the elements. When it is particularly hot, gorillas may prefer treetops for their nests because they are cooler with more ventilation. At Kahuzi-Biega, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, lowland gorillas are more likely to build their nests on the ground. Ground nests are also more common for mountain gorillas in Bwindi's impenetrable forest in Uganda, while treetop nests are more common for mountain gorillas in Rwanda's Parque de los Volcanos. Whether located on the forest floor or in the canopy, well-constructed nests protect gorillas from parasites, insects, and moisture. Nests provide warmth as temperatures drop in the mountain environments of the impenetrable forest and Volcanos national parks. While building a new nest each night protects gorillas from parasites and insects, new nest locations also protect the gorillas from would-be predators. Incidentally, a 2018 study by biologist Rob Dunn and his associates at North Carolina State University compared human beds to chimpanzee nests and found that human beds had far more bacteria associated with skin, saliva, and, yes, feces than the nests of our primate cousins. While their study focused on chimpanzees, it's easy to extrapolate the findings to gorillas, since both chimpanzees and gorillas build new nests nightly. I trekked to see the eastern lowland gorillas at Kahuzi-Biega National Park in what was then Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of the Congo, in the summer of 1991. I was 26 years old, and I had been dreaming of going to Africa ever since I was a boy. I had just completed my second year of teaching and decided I wasn't going to wait any longer. Following Dian Fossey's lead, I took out a loan of $10,000 from my credit union. I also convinced my school district to give me $1,000 towards the trip, with the promise that I would produce curriculum based upon my travels once I returned. I signed up for 2 6-week overland trips with Gerba Expeditions, with 2 weeks in between that I'd be able to explore on my own. I visited Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, Zaire, Zimbabwe, and Botswana. I purposefully stayed away from South Africa because apartheid was still in full play there. In my journal at the time, I wrote that the goal of my expedition was to become, as naturalist writer Cy Montgomery said, an ancient shaman, to feel one with the animals, to travel within their nations, to allow oneself to become transformed, to see what ordinary people cannot normally see. Exploring the natural world was, for me then, as it has always been since, a spiritual odyssey. My intention was to see the mountain gorillas that Dian Fossey had been studying just a few years ago before her untimely murder at Rwanda's Volcanoes National Park. But in the summer of 1991, Rwanda wasn't exactly a prime tourist destination. In fact, the U.S. government didn't want tourists going there at all. There was a travel warning issued by the State Department recommending Americans to stay out of Rwanda. It wasn't that I chose to ignore it, which I would later do when my wife and I visited George Adamson of Born Free's Lion Camp at Kora National Park, a story featured in my Future Lions podcast. In Rwanda, I was just plain ignorant of the travel warning. While I had done my homework on African wildlife and culture, it somehow missed me that Rwanda was deep in the throes of a bloody civil war that had begun in 1992, when the rebel Rwandan Patriotic Front, consisting mostly of the Watutsi tribe, invaded the country from Uganda and tried to overthrow the government of President Juvenal Habyarimana, a Wahutu. Lesson learned: do your homework before traveling and read the State Department warnings. Upon arriving in Kigali, I shared a cab with the other 3 Westerners from the airplane who it turned out would be on the same Gerba safari which started in a couple of days. We were all staying in the same hotel, the Hotel Meridian Umubano. Upon arriving there, I met several American Peace Corps workers who told me about the travel warning. The RPF had taken up residency in the Virunga Mountains along the Ugandan-Rwandan border. The rebels had grown to nearly 12,000 soldiers, and it was feared they were about to launch a major offensive. What this spelled for the mountain gorillas of the Volcanoes National Park, that naturalist Dian Fossey had fought so valiantly to save, no one knew. Many feared the worst. Uganda had exterminated its elephants during the Idi Amin years and the chaos that followed. When men are fighting for their survival, wildlife conservation isn't their concern. At the very least, the war would reverse the progress that Fossey and the Mountain Gorilla Project had made. Worse, the extinction of the mountain gorillas altogether. My new Gerba friends and I wondered if we were going to be able to see the mountain gorillas at all, and if we did, if it would be wise to do so. The Hotel Meridian Umubano was definitely the most luxurious accommodation I had during my African journey, most of which was spent in a tent camping outdoors. It was a very modern hotel with a posh restaurant and a beautiful outdoor pool. But that first night as we ate dinner, there were no more than 6 other diners. There was a palpable tension in the air, a climate of fear. Even in the capital of Kigali, there was a strict 10 o'clock military curfew forbidding anyone to be on the streets. Armored tanks, many of which were supplied by the French, stood guard on many a corner. But inside the Hotel Meridian, all felt well, even if it was deserted. Exhausted from my long flight from London, England, I didn't think much about the war. Instead, I fell fast asleep and dreamed my first night in Africa of zebras and rhinos. In retrospect, I should have dreamt of the war. It might have given me more common sense and a little more respect for the Rwandan Civil War. The next day, my Western friends were still recovering from jet lag, so I decided to go off exploring on my own. As I was walking, I came across a beautiful Rwandan palace surrounded by a large iron-wrought fence. There were tanks on either corner of the palace, but I thought it'd be a great picture to show my students back home, the palace and the armored tanks which symbolized a country at war. No sooner did I take the picture than several soldiers armed with semi-automatic machine guns approached me. Surprisingly, an English-speaking Rwandan happened to be nearby and came up to relieve some of the tension. I couldn't understand any of the rapid French the soldiers were barking at me. The English-speaking Rwandan told the soldiers that I would be willing to pay a bribe if they let me go. The soldiers said if I paid $10, I could go. It seemed like a pretty good deal to me. I was just reaching for my wallet when a pickup truck pulled up and a half dozen more soldiers piled out. $10 was no longer going to cut it. They motioned for me to get on the truck, and with their guns, I wasn't going to argue. The bribe was now out of the question. As I was driven down the streets of Kigali, I recalled the Gene Hackman, Nick Nolte film, Under Fire. In that picture, Hackman was also detained by soldiers and flashed his passport to bystanders, announcing, "I'm an American." Come to think of it, it didn't do him a whole lot of good in the movie. I think it ended with his being executed. But I didn't have any better ideas at the time, so I waved my passport as we drove, and I yelled, "I'm an American! Please help! I'm an American!" Well, the truck drove up to a military barracks. The tall metal gate was opened, and my captors drove into the compound. As we unloaded from the truck, the soldiers motioned for me to sit. I obeyed. They formed a circle around me, pointing their guns, half-cocked at my head. Things couldn't get much worse. I'm not sure how long I sat there like that. I avoided eye contact with my captors, not wanting to do anything to piss them off. My camera had long since been confiscated, and I didn't expect to get it back. I don't know how long I sat there, like that in the hot sun, surrounded by the armed soldiers, their guns pointed at my head. Not exactly a great start to a vacation, but to an adventure, well, not exactly the adventure I had in mind. After a while, the tall metal gates of the barracks were opened, and in walked a Caucasian man in a business suit. Now, I hate racial profiling, but I sure was glad to see that white man, and considering how sparse Caucasians were in these parts, I suspected immediately that he was there to rescue me. As he approached, the soldiers lowered their machine guns. He said something to one of them, and then introduced himself to me. "Hello," he said. "I'm Larry Rector, a U.S. diplomat. Are you an American?" Thank God for the good old USA. "Yes," I told him anxiously. "I most certainly am." Diplomat Rector asked to see the general in charge, who came out shortly thereafter, dressed in his pajamas, awakened either from an afternoon nap or an afternoon delight. Judging from his not-so-pleasant demeanor, I think we disturbed him from the latter. At least the soldiers were now relaxed, and their machine guns were no longer pointed at my head. But I wasn't going anywhere, at least not yet. I hadn't budged from where I sat surrounded. The general wasn't going to release me until they developed my film. Rector had told them they could keep my film, but that wasn't good enough. They wanted my pictures. The general, several of his henchmen, Rector, and myself all piled into a jeep and drove to what I presume was the only speedy photography studio in Kigali. As we drove, Rector whispered to me, "What the hell are you doing here? Don't you know there's a war going on?" I responded sheepishly, "I didn't know that when I made my reservations. I'm going on a safari to see the gorillas." "Well, the wrong kind of gorillas are living in the national park now," Rector told me. "You're lucky I came down here. A man ran up to the embassy gates and insisted an American was being held. We didn't believe him at first, because no Americans had registered with the embassy that they were traveling in Rwanda," Rector told me. "Whoops, sorry. I didn't know I was supposed to do that," I told him. "It's a good idea," he said, "when a country is as unstable as this." By now we were at the photography studio, waiting in the little reception room, the general, his guards, Rector, and myself. The general and Rector exchanged more words as the photographer took my film and went to work. "The general thinks you were taking pictures of the presidential palace," Rector told me. "But I was," I replied, "though I didn't know that it was the presidential palace." "Shh," Rector told me. "Don't tell him that. He thinks you were taking pictures of the presidential palace because you were a spy sent down from Uganda here to assassinate the president." Great. In Africa for 2 days, and I've already caused an international incident. Shit. Now I really was scared. "What will they do to me if they find out I was taking pictures of the palace?" I whispered to Rector. "I don't know," he responded, looking ahead. "We'll just have to wait and see." Well, wait is what we did. Man, it felt like we were there for hours. There is no way I wanted to see those pictures developed. I knew exactly what they'd show, the presidential palace and the security that surrounded it. I began speculating about how they'd kill me. Machete? Firing squad? I hoped for the firing squad. It was a lot quicker anyhow. Rector was probably wondering if he'd ever come across a more stupid American tourist. And the general, well, he was probably thinking about that babe back in the compound and just how pissed off he was that his afternoon romp had been interrupted. Well, finally, a frantic film developer came out of the darkroom and spoke apologetically in rapid French to the general. The general argued with him, but the developer just shook his head sadly. Finally, the general turned to Rector and barked out a fresh set of orders. "What's going on?" I asked nervously, sensing there'd been some sort of resolution. Rector smiled broadly as he told me, "It appears they can't develop slide film in Kigali, Rwanda. They've confiscated your film and are going to release you on one provision. You must leave the country within 24 hours. "No problem," I told him. "My Gerba safari leaves tomorrow, so that's just fine with me." Gerba had already decided that because of the Civil War, it was unsafe to visit the mountain gorillas of Volcanoes National Park and had changed the safari itinerary to include instead the lowland gorillas of Kahuzi-Biega and Zaire. Since I was now unceremoniously kicked out of Rwanda, that was fine with me. After I was released, Rector brought me back to the U.S. Embassy. He told me that the State Department had issued a travel warning in Rwanda for Americans, and that I had been the first American tourist to arrive there in 6 months. The Tutsi rebel Rwanda Patriotic Front was expected to launch a major offensive any day now from Uganda. Rector told me not to go out after 10 p.m. in Kigali or I'd be shot on sight. As I left the U.S. Embassy in Rwanda, soldiers were everywhere throughout the city. The curfew was definitely strictly enforced. As night fell, the tanks rolled out to protect the government palaces, and especially the radio stations from attack. As I returned to my hotel after dinner, soldiers had erected barricades to guard behind each street corner. The Rwandan general had accused me of being an RPF spy, taking pictures of the presidential palace so I could assassinate the Rwandan president, Juvenal Habyarimana. Less than 3 years after I left Rwanda, on April 6, 1994, while returning from peace negotiations in Dar es Salaam, President Habyarimana was assassinated as his presidential jet approached the presidential palace to land. Everyone on board was killed. His Hutu government blamed the assassination on Ugandan Tutsi rebels who were accused of firing a shoulder-fired missile at the presidential jet. The peace process that President Habyarimana had only half-heartedly participated in was thrown into upheaval. President Habyarimana's assassination was the spark that ignited the Rwandan genocide, as his Hutu government encouraged its soldiers and loyal citizens to ruthlessly hunt down and murder, most often by machete, their Tutsi neighbors. The efficiency with which Hutus slaughtered their Tutsi neighbors would have drawn even the envy of Adolf Hitler, as an estimated 937,000 Tutsis were murdered in less than 3 short months. 10,000 each day, 400 each hour, 7 each minute. Children were forced to participate, often killing their friends or neighbors. Victims had their tendons cut so they could not run away. They were made to wait helplessly to be clubbed, raped, or cut by machete. President Habyarimana's assassination was later found to be a sham, committed not by Tutsis, but by Hutu members of his own government who fired the shoulder-propelled missile, likely from within yards of where I had snapped my pictures, as an excuse to start the genocide they'd been planning for months. Habyarimana was their sacrificial lamb. Ironic that the very deed that the general accused me of planning later occurred. For all I know, it was the very same general who detained me that may have ordered the death of his president. In any case, life was cheap in Rwanda in the summer of 1991, and I would have lost mine had it not been for the nameless, kind Rwandan on the streets of Kigali who went to the U.S. Embassy to report my detention, and the faithful U.S. diplomat who rescued me, named Larry Rector. I always wanted to get in touch with Larry Rector again, but I've never been able to track him down. When the Rwandan genocide was unleashed in 1994, the Meridian Umubanos Hotel's French managers understandably fled. The hotel itself became a safe haven, appropriated by the United Nations, and was home to hundreds of Rwandan refugees, UN peacekeepers, and foreign journalists. Listeners may remember its more famous sister hotel, the Hotel des Mille Colonnes, featured in the film Hotel Rwanda. Its then manager, Paul Rusesabagina, gave refuge to 1,268 Hutu and Tutsi refugees fleeing the Interahamwe militia during the Rwandan genocide there. The enormity of it all was lost on me at the time, as I counted my blessings and was only too eager to leave the country to embark on my wildlife safari. Once outside Kigali and through the slums that surrounded its outskirts, Rwanda was quite beautiful. Lush, rolling green hills, neatly divided into allotments of banana, tea, and other crops. The land was highly cultivated. Every available parcel seemed to be planted with something. At dusk, misty clouds would fall upon the mountains, obscuring them, as well as the stars from our view. As we crossed the Rwandan countryside, throngs of people would come running to greet us. Some would put their hands out, expecting to receive a gift or food. Most Rwandans seemed content to wave at us. Zaire was then, as it is now, much poorer than Rwanda, thanks to the corrupt dictatorships of one despot after another. In 1991, Mobutu Sese Seko was still holding firm to the power he'd seized in Zaire in 1965. He was perhaps the most corrupt leader the world had ever seen, embezzling $4 billion to $15 billion from Zaire, much of it U.S. aid that he was deftly able to play in the Cold War game. Mobutu was anything but modest and called himself the all-powerful warrior who, because of his endurance and inflexible will to win, goes from conquest to conquest, leaving fire in his wake. Posters with his mugshot were everywhere, a reminder of Big Brother. Thanks to a government whose only concern was lining its own pockets, Zaire looked more a part of the 18th century than the 20th century, with unpaved dirt roads and villages constructed of mud-like huts or rotundas. Roofs were constructed of straw or tin. Most people had to walk the better part of the day just to get drinking water from their large yellow containers. Most of the families seemed to mostly eat cassava, which is ground into a paste and served with, if available, plantains, fish, bushmeat, caterpillars, or grubs. It was common to see the white pasty food on the ground in front of people's huts. Before boarding a dangerously crowded ferry to Bukavu and nearby Kahuzi-Biega National Park, we camped overnight at Goma, Zaire. Goma had been a resort of sorts during the Belgian colonial days, and many Western European-style homes still adorned the coast of Lake Kivu, although they all looked in various states of decay, as did Goma as a whole. While at the campground, we met a tired, weary-looking couple from Switzerland who had been making an overland trip through Africa since January. They had come from Virunga National Park, where they had hoped to see the gorillas, but like us, were unable to do so because of the wrong kind of gorillas being there. Our conversation was pleasantly interrupted by a tall, sandy-haired German named Konrad Aveling, formerly associated with the Frankfurt Zoological Society and currently working on a project sponsored by the European Economic Community. Aveling wanted to know if we had visited the Virunga National Park and the gorillas at Jamba. He had begun the Mountain Gorilla Project there 8 years ago through the Frankfurt Zoo. By habituating the gorillas and raising much-needed revenue through tourism, Aveling hoped to bolster the gorilla numbers. The project was later turned over to the Institut Zaire pour une conservation de la nature. The Mountain Gorilla Project worked very well until the park's director, a man named Marchendo, had taken over. Apparently, Aveling had been on his trail since Marchendo was director of Garaba National Park near the Sudanese border. When Marchendo took over the park, it had been home to 200 of Africa's last northern white rhinos. When Marchendo resigned, there were only 13 left. This was a direct result of Marchendo's involvement in poaching. Aveling documented the corrupt warden's involvement in the rhino slaughter, but was unable to oust him since his younger brother was the Zairean Secretary of the Interior. However, since the EEC had shown a direct interest in the Mountain Gorilla Project at Virunga, this time Aveling thought he had a good shot at nailing Marchendo. By getting signed affidavits from visitors who had not been given permits to see the gorillas, he could prove that the guides and Marchendo were pocketing the money. The Swiss couple were able to give Aveling more ammunition. Aveling also told us that 2 of the Rwandan mountain gorilla groups had immigrated to Zaire since the guerrilla warfare had begun inside the park. This was further irritating Rwandan park authorities since it had robbed them of needed tourist revenue. I don't think the mountain gorillas were overly concerned with that. Aveling also told us that the EEC was considering funding a research project to end the anthrax disease which seemed to be plaguing the hippos in the area. Aveling himself was a legendary conservationist who worked for decades at Virunga National Park, as long as Fosse herself did, to save the mountain gorillas. During his many exploits in Africa, he was even held hostage by Sudanese rebels and managed to escape. It was a thrill to meet this great German adventurer and conservationist. Kahuzi-Biega National Park is a vast primary tropical forest which stretches nearly 1.5 million acres from the shores of Lake Kivu. Once at Kahuzi-Biega, we hiked for nearly 5 hours through dense vegetation, through sometimes flat, sometimes hilly terrain, at times crawling on our hands and knees through razor-sharp prickle bushes. Red army ants crawled up our legs, stinging us as they crawled. Even after removing the ant, the stinger remained. When gorilla trekking, it's a particularly good sign to find fresh gorilla dung. It means that the gorillas are close. As we climbed a hill, as quietly as we could, suddenly a gorilla group numbering approximately 10 to 13 individuals came into view. The silverback leader of the group, Mushibuka, the leader of the family, sat feeding with 2 infants. As our guides cut vegetation in front of him to give us a better view, Mushibuka raised it back up to obstruct our view. Although we were no more than 10 feet away from him, he didn't charge. It was clear, though, that he only tolerated us and didn't have much use for us. 2 young infants stayed close to his side for protection. As Mushibuka moved, another young gorilla appeared not more than 1 foot from me. I sat down on the grass and filmed her. We literally sat just inches from each other. The young gorilla had her back to me most of the time, but gazed over her shoulder to look at me. For a while, we seemed to be studying each other. She had the most beautiful brown eyes. The group all looked very healthy. Several adults never budged from the treetops where they fed. I was amazed at their ability to feed while hanging from the very top of the trees. Certainly, these gorillas seemed acrobatic. I had the opportunity to visit the gorillas again a second day. I decided to take a second trek to find the group led by Muhiska, the wise old man. This group consisted of 24 individuals, while Mushibuka's group consisted of 22. Fortunately, this time we didn't have to trek as far. We spotted the by now familiar gorilla dung almost immediately. The guides also spotted elephant dung on the trail, which made them nervous. Elephants can be unpredictable when startled in the rainforest. As we followed the gorilla dung and jambu fruit remains, we were suddenly mock-charged by the group's silverback, Mahiska. We held our ground as instructed, and Mahiska retreated back into the trees. Our guides cut foliage away from him, and he retreated further into the bush. A baby gorilla peered at us from her perch on a tree. She seemed to twirl around to get a better look at us before dropping gracefully to the ground. Meanwhile, Mahiska resigned himself to being observed by us. He sat in between the bush, peeling bark away from the plant stalks. An infant, maybe 20 months old, sat with him. Mahiska was then estimated to be 47 years old. Most gorillas live between 35 and 40 years, so Mahiska was well into his twilight years. The infant's curiosity got the best of him after a while. He crawled out onto a branch where he could better observe us. What a lovable ball of fluff he was. He twirled on the branch, peeking directly into our eyes. The little fella even beat his chest in an early attempt at displaying. possibly suggesting that he was indeed a male. Mahiska, by now, realized that we posed no threat to the group. He seemed unconcerned that the little fellow was watching us, but he did keep a watchful eye on him. After a bit, the old silverback's curiosity got the best of him, too. He climbed up onto a branch where he could get a better view of us as he sat munching on his stalks. The guides made sure each visit was no more than an hour in duration. 1 hour a day did not seem like such a dire price to pay for the gorillas to have their freedom. I found my experience at Kahuzi-Biega absolutely magical. As I looked into the brown eyes of Mahiska, the wise old man, I recognized at once my ancestry, where I had been, and dreamed of where I may someday venture. It is a sad indictment of humanity that such magnificent creatures are endangered today. Sadly, the eastern lowland gorillas have not fared nearly as well as their cousins, the mountain gorillas, in the years since my visit to them. The seemingly perpetual civil unrest in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which was then when I visited Zaire, has taken a toll on eastern lowland gorillas. Their range has nearly been cut in half, from 8,100 square miles, about the size of the state of Massachusetts, to about 4,600 square miles today. Today, eastern lowland gorillas occupy only 13% of their historical range. Even at Kahuzi-Biega National Park, a World Heritage Site thought to house the largest population of eastern lowland gorillas, rebels and poachers regularly invade the park, and people set up illegal mines. There were nearly 17,000 eastern lowland gorillas in the mid-1990s, but scientists estimate that population has declined by more than 50% since then. Accurate numbers are hard to ascertain because of the ongoing violence there. Today it is estimated that there are about 6,800 eastern lowland gorillas remaining in the wild across the species range, with about 1,500 at Kahuzi-Biega National Park. This concludes Part 1 of Gorillas in Our Midst, a special 3-part miniseries from Our Wild World. Part 2 will focus on mountain gorillas and the life and sacrifices of their heroine, American ethologist Dian Fossey. We will explore her contributions to gorilla conservation as well as her untimely murder. I will also recall my meeting with Bob Campbell, the National Geographic photographer she fell in love with. Part 2 will also tell the story of Coco the gorilla and the amazing work that Penny Patterson did teaching her American Sign Language. In Part 3, I'll take listeners to Parque de los Volcanos to trek the mountain gorillas that Dian Fossey studied. And we'll also go to the impenetrable forest of Uganda to see the mountain gorillas there. We'll learn more about their behavior and family structure. If you are so moved, I encourage you to donate to the Dian Fossey Gorilla Fund, which does tremendous work in Africa, both for mountain gorillas and for surrounding communities. This concludes our episode. Please be sure to check out our sister Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky, or X pages for accompanying pictures my wife and I have taken in Africa. If you enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to like it, follow it, and leave us a review. Be sure to tell your friends. New episodes are released every 3 weeks on Tuesdays. Please join me again for Our Wild World. You can contact me anytime at ourwildworldshow@gmail.com. I am also available to give talks on many of the animals featured in this series. You can download a flyer with my available talks on any of our websites. The talks are free as long as they are within a 1-hour radius of Rockford, Illinois. I do suggest a minimum donation of at least $50 to a wildlife charity for each talk. Thank you for listening, and remember, Every breath you take connects you with every other living being on this planet. You are a part of nature. Love it, protect it, and nature will never disappoint you, strengthening and healing you in return.